Hello, today on my channel you will hear an amazing story about life. I hope you enjoy this story. This one struck me to the core. Honestly, I still can't forget it. Enjoy watching.
It was a beautiful December day and Elizaveta was late for work. It was the second month since she, an ordinary village girl of 18, had been appointed foreman. Although everyone said that this labor is slave and thankless, Elizabeth was very dear to the new appointment and tried not to let down the head of the unit, Alexander. That's why she started preparing reports not towards the end of the month, as her experienced colleagues did, but from the very beginning, as soon as the data appeared. But even this was still given to the girl with difficulty and took a lot of time. Elizabeth worked in the city of Chicago in the greenhouse Warm Summer, a simple worker on the cultivation of cucumbers and other vegetables. And whether she liked her boss's performance and eagerness to learn new things, or just did not find a suitable candidate, but very quickly Elizabeth went to the promotion. There's nothing complicated there, Alexander assured her. The girls will teach you everything. In fact, it's just additional duties to what you're doing now. Substitute for someone, which is almost always required. Distribute the girls' work, but here they themselves are experienced and will help you. You have a friendly team. Fill out some paperwork at the end of the month. You're attentive and smart. I'm sure you could handle it. And you'll get a raise, right? Experience, too. As you can see, there's a lot of advantages. And you can always come to me a bite. At first, it's always hard. Any job seems difficult. The girl calmed herself, but it's something new in there. Look, I'll gain experience, and things will go faster. There was Elizabeth, and another reason to stay late today is the opportunity to go home later than usual. It was rare, and she was in a hurry to take advantage of it every time. A girl from the village. Elizabeth wouldn't willingly travel back and forth every day, but it was expensive to rent a place in Chicago, so it was much easier to go home. That's what almost everyone who came here to look for work from the villages did, and there were many of them. The buses did not make frequent trips, and he went to Kamenka only twice a day, adjusting the time to fit his regular work schedule. To miss it was almost a disaster. In the evening, there were rarely hitchhikers going that way. The highway was not a federal highway, and to hire a cab was almost a day's salary for Elizaveta. If only the bus would leave an hour later. That was the hour she was missing. And then the reports piled up, and she had to spend long evenings in the office or come at weekends. Elizabeth had no warm feelings for her village or for villages in general. What had brought her mother to these parts? Elizabeth broke away from her sad thoughts and glanced at her watch. It was time. She still had to get to the outskirts of town. That's where Jack would pick her up. Jack is 23, still a bachelor and the favorite of all the girls in the village. Not because he's handsome or educated. No, it's just that he's the richest. Not even himself, but his Uncle Austin. Jack lost his parents early. They say they drank themselves to death and burned to death. After that, the boy was taken in by a family of close relatives. A few years passed, and on the site of the burned house began construction. And what a construction! The house was made of brick, and the buildings were the same, behind a blank fence. Austin moved here to live with his nephew after his divorce from his wife. He brought back not only the house and buildings, but also the greenhouses which were heated. He worked like a bee day and night and soon hired workers and competed with the greenhouse farm Warm Summer, although he didn't call it that himself. The city's greenhouses provided relatively inexpensive produce for various segments of the population. Austin, on the other hand, supplied restaurants and the homes of the wealthy. At first, the businessman helped his fellow villagers as much as he could. But they suddenly decided that with that kind of money he could give more. From time to time, quarrels began to break out with Austin shouting, "You work with me, and you'll live like this. But you hire you give you work, and you don't want to do it well. All you want is money, you drunkards. I was lucky to come to this village. I thought there would be normal people. Oh, they'll burn him someday." Elizabeth's mother lamented after another fight that shook the whole village. But there were no desperate people to openly molest the man who had connections in the high places, not only in Chicago but in Detroit itself. They limited themselves to minor sabotage and sabotage of work. Eventually, Austin stopped hiring workers. Only Jack's loyal friends remained from the village, acting as drivers and guards when needed. Elizabeth made arrangements with Jack 2 more days in advance. He was not too pleased. The pretty girl was known to be unattractive. What the guy wants will not give, and he himself has plenty of money. But he had to give in. His uncle told him to help his own with the little things available. He said it was good for business. Jack didn't understand what was good in it, but he didn't dare to contradict his uncle. "But I'm not going to follow you to your greenhouses," he gritted his teeth in response to the girl's request. "Dangerous highway, waiting in vain." This year's winter was warm and snowy. There was enough snow cover to keep the plants from freezing, but it didn't cause people any trouble with its frequent cleaning. Elizabeth caught the penultimate city bus, then walked a couple of kilometers, enjoying the mild weather. This was where the streetlights in the city ended. There was no snow and no wind either. New Year's Eve was just over a week away, and there was already a fabulous holiday spirit in the air. A quarter of an hour passed from the appointed time, and Elizabeth began to slowly worry. The highway to the exit was empty. Not a single car had passed in either direction during this time. She reassured herself that the road was unpredictable, and Jack could be delayed. But other thoughts popped into her head, suggesting that the villager was a traitor. She didn't dare to call him, so as not to distract the man behind the wheel. After another quarter of an hour, she dialed the phone. "I didn't go anywhere today. My uncle canceled the trip." Jack hummed and disconnected. Elizabeth froze in bewilderment. Was it really so hard to call and warn her? Or at least drop a text message? Though they, rich with cars, could not care less about the problems of the girl. They live in the same village. Now she regretted calling late. A couple of cars had already left for Adelanto. No way to catch up. It was past 8 p.m. Even those who worked late had left. In desperation, the girl wanted to call a cab, wondering if she could afford the expense. Maybe she should go back to work and spend the night in the locker room. There was a shower room there. It was not very comfortable to sleep on the floor, but it was bearable for one night. But the city buses don't run anymore either. Cab out of the darkness, and at that time, oh miracle, a cab appeared on the horizon. An ordinary car with a yellow, decorated with checkers on the roof. Elizabeth waved her hand, wishing that if it stopped, she would go. And if it doesn't, she won't call anything else. She'll walk back to work. Tomorrow she'll sleep there longer. There's no time for traveling. The cab slowed down. There were 2 passengers in the cabin, one of them in the front seat. A woman and a girl, judging by their clothes. "Would you take me to Adelanto?" Elizabeth asked. "We'll stop at Pompeii on the way," the driver said, either asking or asserting. Elizabeth nodded and quickly got into the back seat behind the passenger. Pompeii village was on the way. It wouldn't take long to stop by. Cab drivers picked up people every so often. No surprise there. They rode in silence, only the women exchanging a few minor phrases from time to time. Tired Elizabeth dozed, the eagle-eye pendant on the driver's mirror swaying in time with the traffic hypnotic. The only distraction was the scent of fragrance, cheap, permanent, embedded in the cabin. The cab driver turned off the highway and was soon driving down the main street of Pompeii. "Drop us off here," said the woman in the front seat. "It's all snowed over. You'll get stuck. But walk, it's not far." "Here you are, thank you." Elizabeth didn't even open her eyes. The cab driver wouldn't take her any farther anyway. He'd wake her up. They were driving again. The engine rumbled peacefully. Suddenly it stopped. Elizabeth woke up, opened her eyes, realizing where she was. Darkness swallowed up the details, leaving only the outline of fields and trees. And then her door opened sharply. Strong hands pulled the girl out of the car, and she felt the pain of a blow to her stomach. Her breathing stopped. Elizabeth frantically grabbed the frosty air with her mouth. She was paralyzed by fear. With some remnants of consciousness, she realized that now her hands were tied. The face of the man who was carrying out the manipulations was hidden under a black mask, which allowed to see only the eyes, such as military men wear in movies. All the rest of his clothes, hat, jacket, gloves, pants were also black. It was as if a ghost stood in front of Elizabeth, at times dissolving into darkness. The girl screamed. "Fool," the ghost said in a hoarse, unfamiliar voice, and struck another blow in the same place. Elizabeth felt her hat being taken off and a rag being placed in her mouth and tied at the back of her head. The intruder dragged the girl towards the trees and pushed her so that she fell on her back. Leaning over, Elizabeth began to beat him with her arms and legs as far as she could in her position. The man straightened up again. "You're hot," he said, watching the girl try to crawl away. Then he grabbed her legs and pulled her toward him. His jacket was pulled up and the snow burned coldly against his back. Elizabeth wriggled, trying to roll over onto her stomach so she could get up and run away. Through the horror of the situation, she finally realized what they wanted to do to her. Elizabeth then tried for a long time to forget what happened to her next. She resisted as much as she could. And then, closing her eyes, through the monstrous pain, she tried to memorize what the body pressed closely against her smelled like. The smells were specific. She would recognize them if she met them. She could distinguish the scents perfectly. Elizabeth had already memorized the voice. Her musical ear could not be fooled by the hoarseness. She lay there as a helpless doll even when it was over. The torturer took his time getting up, pulled on his pants, and shook off the snow. Then he sharply set the girl on her feet, but they shrank, and Elizabeth collapsed to her knees. The cold chained her body from the outside, the hot pain burning hot iron from the inside. He untied her hands. "Get dressed," he shouted in a commanding tone. "I'll give you 2 minutes or I'll leave without you. You'll die here." She thought she didn't care anymore, but self-preservation was stronger. Elizabeth crawled out of the snow onto the hard road, pulled the gag out of her mouth with shivering frozen hands, pulled on her jeans, and zipped up her jacket. She wanted to cry to get out of all the dirt she'd been dragged through, but she had no strength. The assailant helped her to the car, put her in the front seat, tied her hands again, put a black blindfold over her eyes. The engine rumbled and the cab started on its way. He took off his balaclava and looked at the victim sitting next to him. Too bad her eyes were blindfolded. He wished he could look into them now, but otherwise he couldn't remember the car and her face. He took off the eagle hanging from the mirror and threw it in the glove compartment. He'll dump it somewhere later. He completed the task he'd been given. He turned to the back seat, where a woman's purse was lying. Probably a card and money in there, but he'd been given strict instructions not to take anything. Not to embezzle a penny. Yeah, okay, he thought, I'll have to be patient for the sake of my future job. And actually, it was even interesting. I'll have to do it once in a while for a change. Satisfied with the result, he started the car and drove out onto the highway. Another car followed him. A village is not just a type of settlement, it is a way of life, a way of thinking. A world where everyone is at each other's fingertips, where you live by the opinion of society or society expels you. In the city, you can afford independence of action, to do as you see fit. The village will not forgive such a thing. Difficulties of family relations almost home. The rest of the way the girl spent in a stupor. The cab turned off the highway and soon stopped. Elizabeth sat like a statue. She did not know what to expect. The back door slammed, then the door on her side opened. The cab driver pulled the girl out of the car onto the hard road again. She heard the sound of a car pulling away and pulled the blindfold off her eyes. The girl was sitting under a road sign that read Adelanto. Her hat and purse were lying next to her. The ice-covered road glistened in the light of the streetlights. A little farther away, the simple wooden houses of the outskirts of the village glowed yellow. The girl had warmed herself in the warm car, and now the cold was slowly touching her body through the denim again. Realizing that everything was over, Elizabeth burst into loud tears, covering her face with her bound hands. The world around her ceased to exist. Someone's hands picked her up again, and she screamed with all her might, "Elizaveta, Elizaveta, calm down, it's me." He introduced himself, but Elizaveta could not grasp the meaning. The voice was familiar, so it must be one of her own. "Jesus, who did this to you? What happened to you?" "Come on, get in the car, I'll drive you home." At the sight of the car, sharp pain again pierced the lower abdomen. Elizabeth was panic-stricken. She began to scream and burst out, not realizing what was happening around her. She was dragged, carried, led. They gave her something to drink. She didn't resist, she just wanted it to be over soon to be left alone. Outside the village, in a vacant lot, two men met. They were both guys of about 25. "What's the point?" One of them said, "What if she recognizes you by your voice now? Couldn't you do it quietly? Anyway, as long as she's in the village, you can't go in there. I'll try to get her out of there as soon as possible, preferably for good. Her parents are fruit. All it takes is a little singing in the ears and some rumors among the youth. What's to worry about? She can't prove anything. You're a fool, Clem. The army hasn't made you any smarter. I don't want any trouble because of you. Henceforth, perform your tasks clearly and without amateurishness." Elizabeth awoke from pain and nightmares and fell back into unconsciousness. They rubbed her face and body, forced her to drink something, tried to lift her up, but left it a futile endeavor. Gradually, the pain receded, sleep became calmer, and reality became more real. The day came when the girl herself got up from the stinking damp bed. She threw on a robe and came out of her cubbyhole of a room, even without a door, fenced off from the common hall by a thin wagon and a light curtain. There was emptiness in her soul, no emotions. Her stomach rumbled demandingly. Her mother met her with a disapproving look. "You've had it," she said in lieu of a greeting. "Found yourself a job, haven't you? Instead of working quietly on the farm, got a little adventure on her. The whole village knows. I'm ashamed to look people in the eye now. I'd have been better off going straight to the whorehouse, and I'd have brought home more money. Or else I'd live in my own town and never come here. And now your mattress is just for throwing away. My dad and I don't have money for a new one. What are you going to sleep on?" Maddie was skillful at inserting insulting nicknames into her speech. Elizabeth leaned against the door jamb. Not the kind of feelings she wanted to fill the emptiness in her heart. "Mother, why do you hate me so much?" she asked in a trembling voice. "What have I done to you?" And she's asking, "You've ruined my whole life, going against people's opinion, running away all my life, showing off all my life. You're just a kid. You're supposed to sit down and listen to your elders, not speak your mind. I told you not to take that job. We don't have enough labor on the farm." No, she wanted to do her own thing. And now I'm a respected man in the village. I don't know how to look people in the eye. Do you know how long it took me to gain respect here? How much I had to endure? No, you're not interested. You don't care about anyone. Realizing that the cauldron in her mother's soul is already boiling and is about to explode, Elizabeth hurried to leave. She was followed by words which the intelligent woman, who had been brought up in a big city, had probably never known before. The girl went to the door, threw on her robe, slipped her bare feet into felt boots, and went out into the courtyard. The frosty air cheered her up. Elizabeth was used to hearing from her mother only reproaches and never praise. But now, when she felt particularly bad, she expected from a close and dear person at least some understanding and sympathy. I wondered how long a person freezes in the cold. She did not think about pain. There is no physical pain that would be stronger than mental pain. No one needs her, will just go away. No one will notice. But first she'd have to deal with Jack. Yes, and in general it would take him with her there, to heaven. Elizabeth assesses her condition. This thought gave the girl strength. She returned, walked confidently to the kitchen, took a piece of bread and poured water into a glass. Breakfast, of course, so bad, but an empty stomach will shut up. The aromatic smell of soup was starting to drive her crazy. Trying to ignore her mother's glances, I poured water into a large pot and put it on the fire. She'd like to make a bath, but she couldn't, so at least she washed in the hay. It's not so cold there. Don't grumble, she told her mother. I'll clean myself up and draw water. We don't have a man in the house. And she deftly dodged a slap. What a wretch! Maddie was indignant and glared at her daughter. You seem to be enjoying it. You're walking around like a fighter. The mattress had indeed fallen into disrepair. The yellow-brown stains were not particularly disturbing, but you can't smell it. Elizabeth sat down on a chair and propped her head with her hand. No, she couldn't be discouraged. She had to settle accounts with Jack. She found her purse and shook out the contents on the table. The papers were there, but the cash was gone, as was the card. Either stolen or taken by her parents, they're quite capable of that. There was still a small stash somewhere in the closet between the books. Elizabeth checked it, though why would she need money now? She twirled her phone in her hands. It wouldn't turn on because the battery was dead. She put it on the charger and found several missed messages from Alexander's boss. The last one said, "Get well. I'm waiting." So we'd been told everything. I should have written that she wasn't coming back, but he'd figure it out for himself in time. The world, colorless on waking, began to turn black. The aching pain in her lower abdomen was a reminder of what the girl dreamed of forgetting. Elizabeth burst into tears. "How is our patient?" She heard a voice as if from afar. It's a neighbor, Baba Julia, so she forgave everyone to call herself. A pensioner of amazing kindness, cheerful in spirit but already weakening in health. Her children had long ago moved away and kept calling her mother to come back, but she stubbornly wanted to stay in the village until the last. It's not difficult for her here. All amenities in the house and gas and hot water, and even a shower stall is available. In summer, her grandchildren visited her all the time. Elizaveta sometimes helped the old woman with house cleaning. How sick she is, the whore, Maddie said. She sasses her mother instead of apologizing. Elizaveta, oh, you girl. Grandma Julia put her arm around the girl's shoulders and pressed her against herself, which made Elizaveta cry even harder. We will roll up the mattress and throw it away. Take it to the dump and wash the bed. In the meantime, I can give you mine. I have 3 of them, and I'm the only one. And you should see a paramedic, even though she gave you a week's sick leave. But you should have a proper checkup, no matter what. You've been lying down for 2 days. And she'll prescribe some useful pills. Oh, Elizabeth, life doesn't end here. The old woman soothed her with a melodious voice. Elizaveta sobbed and shook her head. It's all Jack. Austin. And I took a cab. How else was I supposed to get there? Maddie, is Harry home? Grandma Julia called out. At least you could have made a bath for your daughter. Harry's working, earning money for his family, Maddie said angrily, coming into her daughter's cubbyhole. She should heat it herself. She's not a little girl. Grandma Julia went out, apparently with Maddie. Elizabeth did not raise her head. She was oriented by hearing. She heard the footsteps leaving and a low, displeased whisper of the pensioner. Then the old woman returned. Get ready, girl. Let's go to my place. I'll help you to tiddy up. Come on. Where are your things? Where are your clothes? I didn't want to offend Grandma Julia. Elizaveta stood up, and soon the 2 of them were walking to the gate of the neighboring house. Under the watchful eye of the pensioner, Elizaveta began to come back to life. She came to her home only together with her because the enraged father was ready to kill his daughter in the literal sense of the word. It is unclear whether he was more angry about the incident or the bank card he had stolen from Elizabeth. It was quickly blocked when he tried to buy a case of vodka, paying in small amounts many times in a row. One way or another, Elizaveta was not used to sitting on someone's neck. Baba Julia persistently did not take money from her and even bought medicine at her own expense. It was time to act. The girl put the stones in the bag and practiced her swing. She stashed a sharp knife in her pocket. She gathered her courage and walked toward Austin's house. Jack was at the gate tinkering with his car. Elizabeth gave her an appraising look. No, it didn't look the same. It wasn't Jack either. The whole village had seen him that night, and he didn't sound the same. "Why are you here?" the boy asked mockingly. "You want a man?" "I'm sorry, I'm busy for a week. Although I have a lot of friends I can call, maybe someone will agree." From such words, Elizabeth fell into a stupor. She suddenly realized the absurdity of the idea. Jack is in a thick jacket, there is a lining and maybe in a sweater. Only in the movies would you be able to hit effectively through that thickness. If she had a gas can. You could have warned me," Elizabeth began, gasping with indignation. Jack raised his voice. No, not shouting, but speaking loudly, as if he wanted the whole village to hear him. "Maybe you're only a hussy here, and you've been sitting there, making eyes and spreading your legs." Elizabeth turned back at the laughter. The audience, their peers, began to pull up to them. She would now turn around and leave, but the girl was seized by rage. Without realizing it, she lunged at Jack with her fists. She found herself lying on her back in the snow. There was a lot of laughter and some sarcastic, below-the-belt jokes. Austin Sr. came out to the noise. He shouted loudly, and the crowd instantly evaporated. Jack left too, obeying his uncle's orders. "What do you want here?" Austin asked Elizabeth sternly. The girl stammered and told him what she accused Jack of. "You're so big and smart yourself," she answered. "Why didn't you call first before the bus?" Elizabeth was silent as if she were guilty. "Now get out of here and don't come near my house again, or I'll let the dogs down." Grandma Julia again patiently soothed the roaring Elizabeth with kind words and aromatic herbal tea. Having finally trusted the persuasive speeches, the girl made one phone call and then asked the pensioner, "Baba Julia, and who are you going to celebrate the New Year with?" "I thought so with you. And then they will bring their grandchildren, but you won't interfere with them. And you won't be offended if I leave. I called Alexander, said I could take the night shift, so someone could spend New Year's Eve with their family. And then I asked him to load me up with work for the holidays." Elizabeth smiled, replacing the words at the last moment. She knew that the old woman would not take money from her. "Elizaveta, do you promise me that you won't do anything to yourself?" "I promise, Grandma Julia. Thank you for everything." At dawn on December 31st, Elizabeth boarded the morning flight with a large bag of belongings. Her parents didn't even ask where their daughter was going. Tell me who was interested in the problems of a village girl who is poor in every sense. Who cares about the fate of those who are thrown on the margins of life? That's exactly how Elizaveta felt, unneeded by anyone, gathering her will in a fist to live on. Elizabeth pays a visit to Pompeii. Surprise at work. Elizabeth was met at the bus station by the boss himself. "You can't imagine how happy the girls were that you were coming out." He reported to her the situation on the way. I briefly explained the situation to them, so the cot in the far back room will not surprise anyone. "Here are the keys, it's yours for the holidays. And the kitchen. Maybe you can even cook something. Go to the accounting office before lunch. I ordered that the advance will be given to you in cash until you get a new card." "Elizabeth, are you sure it's okay for you to work so hard after a concussion?" I'm sure. The girl smiled heartily, touched by my concern. There was a surprise waiting for her at work. In the room reserved for the dining room, a festively decorated cake, a bottle of champagne and plastic cups were on the table. "Elizabeth, come on, we're waiting for you." "Oh, Alexander, Happy New Year." "You'll work my shift without any problems." The boss wagged his finger and left. Before the holidays were over, Elizabeth found a small apartment in Chicago, where two other girls lived. The rent, divided into three, was quite reasonable, and the roommates were wonderful. Several times Elizabeth called her parents, but not hearing a single kind word in response, stopped this activity. But constantly communicated with Grandmother Julia from her, learned all the news in the village, received support and advice. Life went on as usual. Find the offender, Elizabeth, on the one hand, wanted to forget that incident like a terrible dream. On the other hand, she kept coming back to the idea of finding the offender. What did she know about him? the color of the car's interior upholstery, and that if it wasn't distorted by darkness, the checkerboard pattern on the yellow taillight. The voice, the smell. Oh yeah, an eel dangling from the window. A little something to identify it. But there were female passengers traveling with her. Maybe they remember more. Yeah, sure, they must know the taxi company where the car was called. Maybe they remember the color and the license plate, or at least part of it. One winter weather day, on her day off, Elizabeth got off the bus at the Pompeii stop. The bright sun sparkled in the snowflakes, and reflecting from them, blinded her eyes. The girl walked to a place where the cab driver could drop off the female passengers. They said it was snowed in, no way through, but all 3 streets were well cleared. After wandering around the village, the girl came across a house that stood out for its decoration. Bright, colorful, decorated with fanciful carvings, it stood among the snowdrifts as in a fairy tale. The garland under the roof was flashing with multicolored lights. Huge light snowflakes on the windows flashed on and off. Homemade figures made of car tires and plastic bottles towered over the fence. Palm trees, swans, monkeys, what imagination people have. On this side of the fence, on the street side, stood a row of live Christmas trees. On their branches were piled huge homemade candies from cardboard and wrapping paper and stuffed in cloth bags with drawn funny faces. A bunch of kids were frolicking on a small snow slide. Children were also swinging on the swing bench, having trampled a hole in the snow under their feet. The fence itself was decorated with snowflakes cut from paper, sometimes so crookedly that it was clear they were not made by adults. Starosta was a sign at the very gate. After a moment's hesitation, Elizabeth pressed the bell button. A deafening barking sounded in the courtyard, and soon someone asked, "Who? Does the headman live here?" Elizabeth asked in reply. "Come in. The dog is tied up," they shouted to her. Trying to keep her heart from beating frantically, Elizabeth cautiously went in. The woman standing outside the house encouraged her to come in. They don't talk across the threshold. Looking around, the girl was speechless. Everything seemed to be made of simple, ordinary materials, but how stylish and beautiful. Cute knickknacks and homemade paintings gave the room uniqueness and coziness. When she came to her senses, Elizabeth handed the hostess a box of chocolates and a gift pack of tea. "Happy New Year to you. I am looking for 2 women in your village, but I don't know their names. They came here by cab about 2 weeks ago, late at night. Maybe you can help me find them." "I'd really like that. What's your name?" the woman asked. Elizabeth, the girl, was embarrassed because she had forgotten to introduce herself. "I'm Selena." "Come in," Elizabeth into the kitchen. Selena sat her guest at the table, warmed up the pies taken from the refrigerator, poured 2 kinds of jam into vases, and put honey. She poured fragrant tea into mugs and then began to ask her questions. Elizabeth told a story she had made up beforehand, how she had gotten into a cab, and then it turned out that she had no cash, and the cab driver wouldn't accept any other way. She promised to pay later, left him her phone number, but he never called. So now she's looking for him to pay him back. Maybe it wasn't entirely plausible, but nothing else came to Elizabeth's mind. She couldn't tell the truth, really. "Soon my husband will come. My granddaughter has gone sledding. He is a major of police, the senior district police officer of our district. Maybe he'll have some advice." Elizabeth was embarrassed. She was sure that the police already knew her story. "No," she did reply herself, "they don't have their own district police officer in the village, and no one came to see her. But rumors are creeping. They creep into every crevice." Nevertheless, she didn't manage to slip away. Billy, who had come in from his walk, listened to the girl once more and then said, "Don't get upset. If a guy doesn't want to call you, you don't have to chase after him. You're a beautiful girl and very modest. Have some pride. And he doesn't owe you that money, but you owe him. Then it's his problem. Just forget this story and this meeting. You will have other young men more worthy." But Selena reassured the girl. "I'll ask around in the village." Leave me your phone number and I'll call you, even if I don't find out anything. Elizabeth thanked him for his hospitality and went home to Chicago. Billy gives Elizabeth hope. Billy called 2 days later and offered to meet at his office. He worked here in the city and drove back and forth every day, just as the girl herself had once done. I asked him, Elizabeth, if he owed him any money. Do you remember anything about him? A little, answered the girl, and told me what she knew. Yes, business, said the major. In the village we found no traces. There are no cameras at the exit in our direction. Why, they say the highway is not federal. Nothing. Now they'll scratch their heads. So I ran our tax scavs. There were no orders at that time in that direction. They themselves asked me to tell them who they have Levicom. Well, extraneous orders bypassing the cash register. And we don't use lights with checkers in our city. They all have either the name of the company or a phone number. What? No way at all. Quietly asked the girl, looking at the floor. Every word of the policeman seemed to open a scar on her heart. What did she expect, though? A miracle. Magic. You could write a statement to our police officer. You have one for 3 villages, as if he wanted to help, the major suggested, but it would most likely be a hang-up. Then why? Elizabeth asked. Thanks, Billy. Can I go now? Wait, we'll go out together. Already on the street outside the police building, the major continued. I shouldn't tell you about it. On the other hand, it's not such a secret. There were 3 more cases like this, all in our direction. Similar cab mode, dark time of day, deserted area outside the city. All the victims are girls from the countryside. 2 wrote statements, but then one withdrew. The other one kept biological traces of her attacker. We'll have something to compare it to when we have a suspect. Now I've instructed all my men to report as soon as there's any fresh information, even if it's at the rumor level. Made a request to the neighboring districts. They also now keep the situation under control. So, Elizabeth, I don't want to get your hopes up, but there are chances. And catch him and put him in jail. In case you remember any details, contact me directly. There were no words of consolation, but Elizabeth felt as if she had grown wings. She walked in thought, and if I had not looked for them, they would never have known, and how many more silent like me can there be? Nestled in the hay with a basin of warm water, Maddie rubbed the washcloth again and again until her skin bulled, trying to wash away the nauseating smell of work. The next day she would dress and go to soap it up again. Flashback chapter. Life as a married woman. Maddie. The road to dreams. Maddie, Elizabeth's mother, met Harry at the Agricultural Institute in her native Detroit. Smart, educated girl was brought up in a big city and was drawn to it. Huge distances, the eternal hurry and noise, Maddie dreamed of exchanging it all for a quiet life. In the evenings to return not to a stuffy apartment, but to her own house with a vegetable garden. She would plant a picturesque flower garden and arrange a pond with an alpine slide, where she would rest her soul. She has seen one of these at her dacha neighbors. She will watch the sunsets over the fields and will not have to jostle on the bus to get home. She, in general, Maddie fell madly in love with the free life of the countryside, in which she immersed herself every summer as a child. Work. You can work at an office, an economist, for example. Sitting in a farm office, poring over papers. It's warm and clean. Maddie fell in love with Harry at first sight, and when she found out that he came from the countryside, she lost her head. So 300 kilometers from Detroit is at a distance. The main thing is that he wants to go back to his hometown. He's got a house left over from his grandmother. Harry didn't have to make long eyes at the object of his lust. He fell for a serious city dweller. Maddie's parents gave their blessing, though her mother sighed. Oh, you'll have a hard time there, daughter. I can't come to you once more. I can't help with my grandchildren. I can't quit my job. It'll be hard to come back. Maddie laughed. She wasn't afraid of hardship. And what difficulties could there be behind Harry's mighty back? Meeting reality. The first bells of trouble to come rang out when Maddie went to meet her future parents-in-law. They didn't like her son's choice. Why bring a foreigner? Couldn't he look for a bride in his own village? There are so many beautiful girls to be married. At the very least, he could have taken from neighboring villages, which are closer to Kameka. Maddie, wanting to become her own, began to study the customs of the village and adapt herself to them. The next round of problems came when the newlyweds graduated from university and went to set up their family nest. There was work for both of them, except that while Harry got a job as a mechanic, Maddie had to go to the farm as a milkmaid. Adelanto was one of the many villages belonging to the company, which was known as a collective farm. There was only one administrative center, and it was far from Adelanto, and there were no vacancies there, and there was no promise of any. Maddie, who smelled of cow shit, longed to wash herself of the stench, but this wasn't a town with a cozy bathroom. Her grandmother's house was old, no gas heat, no water. You soaked the stove, went to the well, go to the street. Actually, in Kameka, there were conveniences in many houses. It was just that when they were installed, the house was empty, and Harry's parents didn't think it necessary to spend money on creating comfortable conditions. The rosy dreams of a pond with an alpine slide melted away like smoke. Maddie worked hard to combine work and home, including the vegetable garden. There was a lot of growing to not only provide for herself, but also to have leftovers to sell. Her husband practically did not help her, because it was not a man's job to do a woman's work. His own men would laugh at him, to chop firewood or to fetch water. It's please, that only the wife should clean, wash, and cook, and she should take care of the vegetable garden too. The young woman put heavy buckets on the stove to warm the water and wistfully recalled the washing machine that had been left in the city apartment. Harry, on the other hand, was bored in the evenings. After working his shift, he hung around the village looking for entertainment. Sometimes he tried to distract his young wife by dragging her to bed, but Maddie waved Harry away, once so elegant and clean-cut, now reeked of iron and machine oil. He shrugged perplexedly at the suggestion that they take an impromptu shower together. Who washes so often? Why? It's an unnecessary waste of resources. 6 months later in the winter, when the roads were all snowed in, Maddie was sobbing in her home from a miscarriage induced by hard work. Her mother-in-law reprimanded her son, but in a way that her daughter-in-law was sure to hear. I told you not to take the city, sissy. Here's the result. You should listen to your mother. She will not advise badly. She has already lived half her life. She can't bear it, you see. I'll never expect grandchildren from you. The neighbors ask me every day. What am I going to tell them now? I'm ashamed of you. You're a disgrace to your mother. Our girls are blood and milk. They can do any kind of work. He went on listing families where the wife was a hard worker, the household was in order, and the house was full of children. Harry kept silent, not even trying to defend his wife. Soon he came home drunk, for the first time, but by no means the last. They should have divorced before the consequences of a child came. But Maddie had grown even more fond of her husband, so attached to him that she couldn't imagine life without him. She forgave everything, and his outings, of which she knew very well, and constantly drunken state and quarrels, which he arranged for her, sometimes for persuasion, putting his hand to the arguments. Then he sobered up, apologized, and life returned to normal. Maddie tried to please her mother-in-law, constantly invited her to visit, tasty treats, demonstrating a well-maintained house, listened to wise advice, and tried to follow them. Many efforts cost this young woman, accustomed to a very different life. But the mother-in-law finally began to soften and treat her daughter-in-law more favorably. Children, and hair and a freeloader. They lived well or poorly, but after another year and a half, Maddie gave birth to a son. All through the pregnancy, she took care of herself and tried to make her job easier. The boy was named Anthony. The whole family rejoiced and Harry was born. Harry even stopped drinking, and all his free time babysat the child, and the grandmother did not lag behind. Maddie had a lot of free time to do household chores. After 2 more years, their family was in trouble by the standards of the village. Maddie gave birth to a second child, and after that the doctors told her the disappointing news. She would not be able to have any more children. The young woman was delirious after the birth, and the hungry baby roared nearby, getting on the nerves of the exhausted mother. Even there, in the maternity hospital, Maddie hated her daughter for all the torment she had caused her, for the sentence passed by the doctors, and then for the fact that she had to take care of the baby. According to the rules of the village, the husband should bring up the boy, but it was the wife's duty to take care of the girl. Little Elizabeth grew up an orphan with living parents and a stepdaughter to her own mother. It seemed that the only person who treated her well was her brother. When he was still very young, he at first clumsily rocked the stroller, soothing her crying sister, then taught her to eat, dress, and other childish wisdom. Only 2 years difference in age, but how much experience he could pass on to her. How serious he was about his work. It is not without reason that they say village children grow up faster. Anthony and Elizabeth. Childhood. The years passed. Children, as it is supposed to be, grew up active fidgeters, had their own opinion on everything, and were not afraid to defend it. Only the attitude of adults towards them was different. Anthony was forgiven everything, and even admired a real man growing up. Elizabeth felt a beating for the same thing. But the boy did not stand aside. He constantly stood up for his sister, in front of his peers, then in front of parents, and sometimes not only with words, and hid her behind his back in the literal sense of the word. "Do not worry," he consoled Elizabeth, "you have me, and I will not do anything. And even if they do, I can give back." Elizabeth's birth seemed to break the cloudless way of life that had been established for 2 years. Harry began to come in drunk again, sometimes very drunk. The children became estranged from the local grandmother, and she reproached Maddie inappropriate education, often in public and in front of her son. All this did not contribute to peace in the family, and scandals and quarrels began, during which the children, having taken food from the kitchen, hid somewhere in the barn, and in the morning, having secretly collected their textbooks, they would run to the school bus. When they didn't have time, they stayed at home, skipping classes. Studying suffered, but who needs it in the village? There are no academicians here, and being a worker does not require much knowledge. The only bright spot in Maddie's life was her appointment as head of the firm. Now she sat in a small office here on the farm and worked with documents. Almost everything was just the way she wanted it. Maddie was very afraid that Anthony would start drinking like his father. He was already starting to ask her son to keep him company. Therefore, the woman convinced the whole family, including Anthony, that the best help to the family is not to stay at home, but to get a profession. After finishing 9th grade, the boy went to Chicago to study to be a locksmith, and then he was taken into the army. Elizabeth was left alone. Now, in case of anything, there was no one to protect her. She lay low, pretending to live by the rules of the village to avoid gossip and punishment. But her soul rebelled like a wild beast in a cage. The village mentality weighed on her. Maybe that's why, looking for a way out of the situation, Elizabeth became close to her distant grandmother, Maddie's mother. Maddie herself was very resentful about this. Doesn't her mother realize that she will spoil Elizabeth with her advice, that here is a completely different life, other rules, and requires a different upbringing? The girl herself, as if not dreaming of a quick escape from home, but decided, contrary to popular opinion, to finish 11 grades and go to Detroit to enter a higher educational institution. Her parents were grumbling that they would have to feed her for 2 more years, that Anthony was a good boy, and that the city grandmother had such a bad influence on Elizabeth. They seemed to have forgotten that Harry had done the same thing. Elizabeth had gone to school, but what kind of education is there in the village? According to the results of exams for the desired professions, the girl did not pass the competition, and where the points were enough did not want to go on their own, and therefore did not apply. Elizabeth decided to work for a year's study, retake the exam, and try to enter again. She found a job in Chicago. Elizabeth left thinking that she would never come back here again. She was wrong. In spring, her brother Anthony, a loyal friend and protector, was returning from the army. It was impossible for Elizabeth not to see him. Elizabeth tries to mend her relationship with her mother. Days passed, the 8th of March was approaching. The sun was warming the earth with its gentle warmth, and the first tinted streams flowed down the sidewalks. The trees were coming out of hibernation, and the air was filled with the chirping of birds and the smell of spring. It was time to change winter clothes for lighter ones, to congratulate Grandma Julia from the bottom of my heart, to establish relations with my parents. In general, there were a lot of reasons to go to my hometown. There was no word from Major Billy, and Elizabeth did not call him. She had already resigned herself to the fact that this crime, like many others, would remain unsolved. It was much more important for the girl to establish her new life, and somehow to build bridges with the old one. Elizabeth had planned to visit home the day before. On the holiday itself she worked. She had specifically asked for it. She generally liked to work on holidays to celebrate them anyway, with no one to celebrate them with, and they were paid decently. The girl bought gifts and called Dasha in case she needed to bring something from the city. Elizaveta decided to surprise her parents. She arrived in the village by evening bus to catch everyone at home. Atalanta welcomed her unfriendly. From the bus to the house is 1.5 kilometers. Elizabeth slung a large bag of gifts over her shoulder and walked quietly, enjoying the awakening nature. Although she heard that she had decided to go back home to her mother, had she had enough of walking? Did you bring her a surprise in your hem? Elizabeth turned around. 2 girls younger than her, brightly, almost vulgarly painted, with piercings in their nostrils, were laughing ostentatiously. The girl quickened her step and silently made her way home under the laughter of some youngsters. "Mom," she called out from the threshold, "happy holiday to you." She walked into the house, holding a large box of candy in her hand. It was only a small part of the gift Elizabeth had prepared for her mother. Maidie pulled her daughter away from her. "You better go," she said. "It's quieter here without you." Elizabeth put the gifts and presents on the kitchen table. She handed her mother the money, and she quickly tucked it into her pocket. "You know, Mom," the girl said sadly, "someday you will forgive me and love me, or just miss me and want to talk. Then just call me. I'll be waiting always. And I'll get my things and leave as you wish. Your things aren't there, don't bother. Dad threw it all away when you left." Elizabeth sat shocked. She wanted to ask why Mom was okay with it, but the girl already knew the answer to that question. Father would just use brute physical force. He always did that against those who didn't like his opinion. Just in case, Elizabeth went into her cubbyhole, opened the closet, and pulled out the desk drawers. It was indeed empty. Gone were her things from the hallway as well. Nothing left. Baba Julia once again poured balm on the wounded soul of the girl. "You leave your winter clothes here. I have a lot of space in the hay. Will not interfere with anyone. Do not be afraid. And thank you for the presents. I'd have kept them." Elizabeth shook her head. Some things were dear to her heart, and it was a pity to lose them. And buying new clothes was an extra expense, even though Elizabeth was not fussy. To distract herself from her gloomy thoughts, she offered to help around the house and asked for news. "How's your health?" the pensioner asked. "Thank God," Elizabeth replied, realizing what the old woman was asking. Pregnancy, which she was so afraid of, did not come. At least she was lucky in something. She had already peeled the potatoes and started the salad when Julia began to tell her the unpleasant part of the news. "Oh, they are talking about you, Elizabeth. They still can't calm down. It's the young people or Jack and his company. To be more precise. He's lost his conscience. He has no respect for anyone in the village, neither the little children nor us old people. He talks dirty to our faces, spreads rumors behind our backs, and the young ones follow him like sheep after a shepherd. What have they found? He swindles money, takes little girls to the city for fun. His uncle keeps him from crimes like robbery, but not from his evil tongue. And the pensioner waved her hand sorrowfully. After a short pause, she continued, "You girl, you need to organize your life and, if possible, away from here. The people here are cruel, envious. This is not the village where I started my life." In the morning, the girl left thinking that she would never come back here again. She was wrong. In the spring, her brother Anthony, her faithful friend and protector, was returning from the army. It was impossible for Elizabeth not to see him, and she wanted to do it before her brother heard the sad story. The demobbing party, a long-awaited reunion. That May day, Elizabeth got up very early to catch the morning bus and spent the whole morning twirling in front of the mirror. "It's funny," she thought, "I'm going on a date, and it's only to see my brother." With cotton pants, she picked up simple boat shoes. Over her blouse, she put on a white light sweater with a sleeve. She didn't wear makeup, as she rarely used makeup at all. She finished her outfit with dark glasses, hoping to hide behind them from the villagers. As she jolted on the commuter bus, the girl remembered their childhood friendship. How she'd come up with adventures, and Anthony, like a loyal knight, would follow her and then cover for her in front of her parents. How she missed him when he left home for 3 years to study in Chicago. How did he look now, pumped up and trim, or, on the contrary, slimmed down on government food? Elizaveta let her jokes pass between her ears. She had already developed an immunity to them. She indifferently noted how almost everyone squinted at her belly. You can't wait. Regardless of her parents' reaction, she went into the house, washed her hands, and put on the apron she had brought with her. However, her parents didn't care about her. Her father was heating the sauna, her mother was fussing in the kitchen. The table was in the courtyard, and the whole crowd said it. Anthony was valued, respected, and welcomed by the whole village. There must have been a treat from every house. Elizabeth joined in. She took out a bag of pastries that she had cooked all the previous day and cut each pie in half so that the filling was visible. She arranged them beautifully on a plate and began to eat the fruit she had also brought. "Elizabeth, you have forgotten your village," someone complained to her. "But the village remembers me well." Elizabeth suddenly snapped at herself and walked away. She didn't want to spoil her mood on such a day. From the bus station, Anthony was brought by a neighbor. His mother was the first to hug her son and stepped back, wiping herself with her apron. Then his father came up, pressed him to his side, and wiped away a stingy male tear. Then one by one, friends and fellow villagers clapped on the shoulder, shook hands. The girls smiled and made eyes at the handsome, trim guy. Finally, Elizabeth came out. "Brother," she whispered, trying to hold back her tears, and threw herself on his neck. "Elizabeth." My brother not only hugged her, but lifted her off the ground. "I missed her so much. You haven't written much at all for the last 6 months. It's like something happened. It's time for you to get a girlfriend." Elizabeth whispered quietly in his ear, laughing. Anthony laughed heartily. At the big table, they waited patiently for the celebrant to clean himself up. They seated him in the most honorable place, poured him a cup, and began to ask him questions. "Wait a bit, the man is on the road, let me eat." Mom kept repeating. The inquiries would stop, but in a second it would start again. Elizabeth watched with a smile. She was happy to see her parents happy, the way she would never be able to make them happy. She waited until her brother left the table and ran up to him. "Anthony, I have to go. I have to go to work. Here's my address. I'm renting a 3-person apartment with my girls. When you're in Chicago, you should come by." And without waiting for an answer, she walked away. She spent the rest of the day, as usual, at Grandma Julia's. Harry educates his son. The demo bell party turned into an all-out drinking party, like any party in the village. Anthony distanced himself from the crowd, not sharing the common passion. As a child, he had seen enough of his father's perpetual drunkenness and his inadequate antics. He'd gotten drunk a couple times himself just to try it out. He didn't like the feeling at all. It's how you have to disrespect others and yourself to stoop to such a state. Besides, the army had taught him to always keep a clear mind and a sense of self-control. So the guy only pretended to drink with everyone else, because it was not welcomed by village customs to stand out from the crowd. The sun was setting, and the women were clearing away the leftovers from the table. My father sat down next to me, his breath puffing out of his mouth. His tongue was already slurring, but the man persistently searched for companions for a heartfelt conversation. "Son, do you know what Elizabeth has become?" Harry hugged his son, almost piling on top of him, and said in syllables, "A war. You've seen how she's dressed today. She's moved to the city. Took all her clothes out of here, every single one of them. She looks down on the local boys. Doesn't want to know her father and mother. She's forgotten us, and you forget her. Let's have a drink." Anthony gently dismissed his father and walked down the road. The information he had received did not fit in his head. However, he had already noticed the dislike of Elizabeth among the villagers. But how did she, a modest, kind girl, take up such a trade? However, whatever pushed her sister to the slippery path, she would not lose his brotherly respect. A fight in a vacant lot. He didn't realize he had reached the end of the village. There was a large group of young people hanging out in the vacant lot. "Anthony, come and have a drink," they called out. Anthony approached, and here, too, the usual conversations about life began. "Oh, Elizabeth didn't even bother to stay," said one of the boys. "Where could she?" supported his friend. "She works the night shift," and the girl twisted her hips demonstratively. "Okay, shut up," Anthony advised gently. "Whoever she is, she's my sister, and I'll have her discussed." "Why are you, Liddy?" Anthony's drunken swing was easily deflected, sending the bully into a short flight with a horizontal landing. There were deafening female squeals and strong male curses. A few of the more heated ones went on the attack. Still, most of the crowd prudently stayed out of the way, confining themselves to shouting. The rest Anthony scattered them like sacks of organic fertilizer. He had his own advantages. First of all, he was sober in the truest sense of the word, and secondly, he had been practicing various martial arts for the last 3 years and had brought this skill to a high level in the army. By the end of the fight, 2 of them were lying on the ground, not even trying to get up. One was screaming, the other was moaning. 3 more were glaring angrily, taking on an unsightly appearance. Anthony wiped the blood from his face. What can you do? It's a crowd. You can't keep track of them all at once. So he commanded, "Take these 2 and carry them gently into the village. We might have to call an ambulance." Jack found Anthony the next afternoon. "Come," he said reluctantly, "his uncle wants to talk to you." Jack found Anthony the next afternoon. "Come," he said reluctantly, "his uncle wants to talk to you." A tempting offer. Maddie only splashed her hands and started to dissuade him. No one in the village expected anything good from the businessman, and Austin Sr. had a special grudge against Anthony. The 2 men who were now in plaster at Anthony's mercy were his employees. But the boy, out of natural curiosity, ignored his mother's fears and agreed. He followed his guide through an iron gate into a brick-fenced yard. Cameras stood everywhere so that no section would be left unnoticed. On either side of the walkway, vicious Dobermans were tearing chains with a wheeze. Austin sat in the arbor under the shade of the blossoming apple trees, where he gestured to his guest. He asked him when Jack had left them alone. "Half the village is hungover after last night's booze. I can buy you a drink if you want luxury cognac. If you want the usual vodka." "No need," Anthony replied. "Anything to do, or shall I go? I have a lot of work to do at home." Austin sat down next to him. "Breathe?" he asked. Anthony complied with the request as if he didn't want it. "So you didn't drink last night? That's what I thought. If you were drunk, you wouldn't have taken my boys so easily. Why are you a teetotaler? You know, I respect you. There's not many like you in the village. Mine were drunk. What do you want from me?" Anthony asked politely again. Austin Sr. returned to his seat and examined the boy with a scrutinizing gaze. He reacted calmly, waiting for his interlocutor to get bored. The silence lasted for a long time. "Did he drive the car?" Austin finally groped a pause. In the Army, I drove the chiefs, and they didn't complain, Anthony replied. Do you need a job? Will you be my courier? I mean, as a driver. Anthony thought about it. He was going to look for a job in the city. He was not satisfied with the salary at the local collective farm. But if the pay was decent here, it would be even better. It would be possible to stay with his parents for a while and help them around the house. The farm had fallen into disrepair without a strong male hand. But on the other hand, one small detail prevented me from agreeing at once. As far as I remember, you don't take people from our village, he replied, so why the sudden offer? I don't agree with the businessman, but now I don't have much choice. My guys are out of order at your mercy, and fresh produce won't be fresh for long. It's not good for business to disrupt orders, and it's hard to find a responsible, non-drinking driver on short notice. 5 hours one way, not everyone will do it. I'd send Jack, but I need him here. And he can't handle it. He's a naughty boy. What about money? Anthony asked. Austin grinned. Money-wise, I still owe you a deduction for the sick pay for those 2 misunderstandings. But I won't. It's good pay. You'll like it. Better than here on the collected farm. Where do you want to go? Tomorrow morning. We'll have to leave at dawn or even earlier. Drive carefully. Don't speed. I don't want any fines. Don't go anywhere and don't stop anywhere. You can rest at the delivery point, but you have to be back the same day. Come on. I'll show you the route. Anthony's on the trail of the assailant. A visit to the Major. One rainy Saturday afternoon in June, the bell rings at Billy's house. What can I do for you, young man? The Major asked the visitor. Come on in, you can't stand in the rain. My name is Anthony. I'm Elizabeth's brother. You remember her? She was attacked before New Year's Eve. Anthony went to great lengths to get his sister to talk. He had given Jack's involvement in the case of special significance, and he was not mistaken. Elizabeth should never have mentioned him to the Major. They would have been caught long ago. He sat down on the couch next to Billy and opened the photos on his phone. That's the yellow checkered lantern, he commented, and that's the pendant Elizabeth saw used the balaclava. I could even put her in the car and she'd recognize the scent, but I didn't want to alarm her, so I gave her a real interrogation. Where'd you get that? Billy asked me sternly. In Jack's car in the glove compartment. Anthony, I understand your desire to punish your sister's abuser, but that's not enough evidence. No, it's not evidence at all. Look, Anthony continued, there were 4 cases. Elizabeth told me, don't be surprised. This businessman has 4 underlings, all friends of Jack's. Does that ring any bells? Maybe we could bring someone in. Well, I think we can get one, Billy said, but we'll scare the rest away. They'll turn on each other, Anthony exclaimed. Like spiders in a jar, or do you think every one of them was doing it in secret? Well, we can try. Do you have any idea who attacked your sister? Almost 100%. Clem is the only one from outside our village who lives in the neighborhood. I don't know how he got into that neighborhood. He's a real badass. I took a moment when he wasn't home and brought Elizaveta there. She says there's a peculiar odor in the room, a peculiar smell. His clothes were soaked in it. You did your job, just don't go vigilant. I wouldn't want to have to prosecute you. They're not offering you anything like that. Anthony laughed. They're not exactly idiots. They're pissed that Austin hired me, trying to set me up. But they're not exactly on the farmer's good side. You worked for Austin, the Major asked in surprise. Anthony, what army did you serve in? You see, here's the thing. It's a dangerous assignment, but I have to offer it to you. Undercover. Anthony fumbled for a hidden panel in the wall and carefully opened the door disguised as the far wall of a closet. For a couple weeks now, he'd been exploring the house and Austin's lot up and down, trying to remain undetected. The case was not simple. Cameras were hanging in places of free access. Alarms were coming to the doors of important rooms, and necessary documents were under special protection. Even earlier, Billy had put him in touch with people in the narcotics division. Austin Sr., a chemist and biologist by training, had long been under their surveillance, and there was plenty of circumstantial evidence. But the court needed more hard evidence, but they couldn't get it, even with the searches. And after them, the department received a reprimand for harassment of small business, and an order to leave the businessmen in peace. The only hope was for a fellow person inside. But here, too, they were met with failure. Austin didn't let outsiders near him, hired only native villagers, and most often shy girls, to work in the greenhouses. Recruiting them was a hopeless endeavor, Jack's buddies even more so. Anthony was a gift to the department. They had been instructed, given a few practical training sessions, supplied with the necessary equipment, and given a pretty young Lazen, whom Anthony supposedly began to court. By now, however, his work could be considered finished. He found 2 laboratories for the manufacture of powder, places of storage of raw materials, and ways of approach to all this goodness. Took samples. Identified dealers and suppliers, maybe not all of them, but enough. Recorded some important conversations. Installed a spy program that put computers under remote control. There's more than enough evidence. All that's left is to organize everything to bring down the underworld at once. He was offered to finish the job so that he wouldn't accidentally discover himself. But Anthony insisted on continuing. 2 things were bothering him. First, he had not discovered the stash of money, and there must be one. In the second place, there was no way that Austin Sr. could have failed to provide additional escape routes. Both roads leading to the village could easily be blocked, and then the businessman would have nowhere to go. Or is that not the outcome he's counting on? The tiny room behind the secret door looked like a laboratory. Anthony turned on the flashlight on his phone, in addition to the strip of light from the door. Tiled floor and walls. A stooped chair and a massive cabinet angled against the wall. Wires dangled from the ceiling. Either this room wasn't needed, or it had been recently equipped with the intention of expanding production. Anthony had discovered the door on the floor not by accident, but with a great deal of luck. It was very skillfully concealed by a motley pattern of tiles. The dimensions resembled a trapdoor that a man could safely fit through. If it was a way out, it could be connected to some kind of sensor with output to a computer. Anthony decided not to risk it. Let the guys from the Special Forces check it later. If you know where the pursued person ran, it's easier to catch up. The guys straightened up to put the phone away. Turned to the door. From there, from the border of light and darkness, the muzzle of a gun was staring at him. "Well, you're an asshole," Jack said contemptuously. "Put your hands up where I can see them. I just wonder what to do with you. Give you back to your uncle alive or dead." I warned him. "You're an asshole," Jack said with contempt. "Put your hands up where I can see them. I just wonder what to do with you. Give you to your uncle alive or dead." I warned him. "Negotiations. Well, it will be problematic for you to bring me alive. And it's a little early for me to be a corpse. I still have things to do," thought Anthony, following Jack's orders. He stood still, assessing the situation. Far enough to draw out his weapon, and yet close enough for the master of the house not to miss. So that leaves negotiation. Ever thought of starting your own life away from your uncle? Or do you think he'll keep you as his assistant forever? Anthony threw a touchstone. Jack chuckled ironically. "You understand a lot. He's training me, and pretty soon I'll be his equal. You'll receive a gift from me in proof of my loyalty. Then tell your uncle that he'll be found and locked up anyway. I've collected enough evidence. All of it is in the police. All that's left is to get the mastermind. And even destroying the lab won't change anything. They have nothing on you yet, but I think they will press you during the interrogation, and you will really become an equal with your uncle, only not in your criminal business, but in responsibility for it. If I don't get in touch with you tonight, it will all be covered up very quickly, and you won't have time to clean up any loose ends." Jack thought about it. That was a good sign that Anthony had hit the mark somewhere. "What if you made contact?" Jack asked. I have 2 flights tomorrow and the day after tomorrow. They want to wait for me to finish them." Jack thought again, but kept his gun up. After a brief pause, Anthony decided it would be a good time to suggest a course of action. "There's a lot of money in his stash," he said, hoping it was. "There'll be more in 2 days. In that time, you can figure out where and how to escape. They won't be looking for you alone, and they might even think you're a victim. It'll be easier for you to find a place on your own with all that money." Jack swallowed noticeably. "Why would you do that?" "You're letting me go, and I'm free to leave tomorrow." "What if you turn me in?" "Am I an idiot, or what?" Anthony got angry. "What's the use? You'll be released immediately. Only will scare your uncle away. I'm just trading your freedom for my life." Jack slowly lowered his gun. "Go away," he said shortly. "That's how people disappear. Hard plans." Anthony made his way to the garage quickly before Jack realized it. Austin Sr. had several cars, and he allowed Anthony to use one of them for personal use. Within reason, of course. The boy threw a yellow flashlight, an eagle chain, and a balaclava into the glove compartment of his assigned car. In the same place, he put a couple of ropes found in the garage, and another one he stuffed into his vest pocket, carefully rolled up. Having traveled a part of the planned route, they stopped. He got out of the car suddenly. It was bugged, and informed the charming liaison about what had happened. Checked if it would be convenient to quickly use a stun gun and a knife. Then he got back in the car and continued on his way. Partly he wasn't lying to Jack. Getting the whole foursome involved in drug distribution was problematic. A lawyer could defend even his nephew, say they were working blind, thinking they were hauling vegetables like Anthony. It's only if Austin turns himself in, but he's a tough nut to crack. Which means everybody's going to walk free. No, not everyone. There's already a file on 2 of them, and the girls who victimized them weren't the least bit shy. They're definitely going to be brought in. That leaves Clem and Jack. With the latter, the case would have to be left on its own, as the court decided. But Clem worried Anthony much more. The confession. Anthony knew the daily routine of each of his accomplices. He met Clem leaving his village on his bike. He turned the car across the road and blocked his path. "What are you doing?" Taking off his helmet, Clem asked. "Get in the car, I have something to do." Clem looked, hesitated, but sat down anyway. Anthony locked the doors, then slowly drove off. As he walked, he pulled evidence out of the glove compartment. "Do you recognize it?" he asked. "You use these things as disguises and distractions." I threw that eagle away like I was told to." I could hear the fear in Clem's voice. "So someone really wanted me to see it, and that's why they brought it back. Any idea who?" "Where are we going?" Clem suddenly changed the subject. "You should know where this road leads," Anthony answered calmly. "There, further on. The forest is thicker and more impenetrable. There is seldom anyone will go there. Wolves again. You've heard of people disappearing, haven't you? It would be easier for me to get you there alive than to carry your corpse." "Open up." Clem started yanking on the door in desperation. "Stop, let me out, you're crazy. You wouldn't dare." With a blow of his elbow, Anthony calmed the raging passenger, preventing him from reaching for the door lock button. "I'm finishing up a big project and helping the cops out," he said. "You know what he asked for as a reward? Your life, and they gave it to me. They said go ahead, at least one less scumbag on Earth. So don't worry, I'll get away with it." Of course, Anthony was lying. He knew that if this crime was discovered, he would be punished to the full extent of the law. But now his only desire was to film on his phone and then show his sister the frightened, remorseful eyes of the criminal, his apology, and the end of his life. "Listen," Clem suddenly shrieked. "I was forced. All I wanted was to get a job with this rich man. And Jack said that only through him. Then if he recommended, Uncle will not refuse. But in order to do that, I had to pass a loyalty test. Like they all did. To be bonded, to be a brotherhood. They filmed it on their cell phones and they showed me how they did it. Anthony slowed down in surprise. Do you have that tape? Your own or someone else's? No, Jack kept it with him. To keep us from sneaking out. And this girl, Clem continued, she was just the most convenient. She was late, always asking for a ride. So Jack figured out how to pull it off, waited until she got on the highway and told him about it and called me. He wanted to get rid of me. Anthony wished he'd turned his phone on record. He hadn't expected Clem to crack so easily. He thought he'd have to interrogate him in the woods. He set off again. Where did you pick up the women? No, they were girls. They weren't from around here. They didn't know anything. Jack told them something, gave them money, so they agreed. And then he took them right away. It was to make sure she wouldn't get in an empty car. She's a scaredy cat, Jack said, cautious. Look, I've told you everything. Let me go. Well, if you want some money, I've got some saved up. Anthony was beginning to lose control of himself. He was filled with anger and hatred. In a way, it was for the best, he thought. It would be easier to do what he had planned. But he had overestimated himself. Clem must have been watching his reaction for a long time and waited for the moment. He spun the steering wheel sharply and immediately hit Anthony in the back of the head so that the guy's face crashed into the steering rack. Anthony lost consciousness. Clem dragged the emotionless driver into the forest line. Anthony is right, walking here is really rare. Then got into the car and drove to their meeting point. There he changed the car for his favorite bike and drove to the Bogadirev's house. Spiders in a jar, leaving the iron horse at the gate, Clem ran into the house. In the soul swelled rage and desired to strangle the traitor. He looked around the room. There were so many doors, including secret ones, where he'd find Jack. A brilliant idea, he thought, occurred to him. The Blatant song that had been set as the telephone ringing sounded incessantly, irritating the already agitated Jack. He had thought over everything Anthony had said, and was now hurriedly moving the money from the stash into his black backpack. He should have handed over the traitor when Jack realized that he fell asleep every time he drank with him. But he wanted to catch him red-handed with proof. So today he managed to discreetly switch Anthony's drink. But if the cards were dealt differently, so be it. Uncle won't be in till late afternoon. What better time to make a getaway? And waiting for the money to arrive is an added risk. Less is better. He's had enough. Clem walked toward the ajar door at the sound of the bell. He had never been in this place before. Cautiously stepping, he entered the room and froze with a sagging jaw. This much money he'd only seen in movies. He whistled and lost the effect of surprise. Jack turned around, then glanced briefly at the gun lying on the table. Shit, he'd had the misfortune to put it so far away in the way of his belt. It was farther away from Clem, though hidden in the darkness. What are you doing here? Jack asked his buddy. He grinned wickedly. You gave me up, didn't you, asshole? You thought you could take me down with someone else's hands, didn't you? And it didn't work. Or you tried to run away. Look, you'll never get out of here. In one leap, Clem caught up with Jack, who was trying to escape into a dark corner. He hit him hard, and he got hit himself. The fight didn't last long and was equally unsuccessful for both of them. When Jack had the chance, he got to his feet, stretched his arm forward, and began to persuade his former comrade. Wait, we're not going to get anywhere this way. Let's split this money in half. Anthony's working for the cops, it turns out. How did you get involved with them? They're going to shut this whole place down soon. And if we beat each other up, we'll only make things worse for ourselves. The sooner we leave, the better, and preferably without getting beaten up. Don't you agree? You could also go to the lab, get yourself some of that coveted powder. I know you use it on the sly. I'm not your enemy. I didn't rat you out to your uncle. Clem stood, holding onto the wall and trying to catch his breath. He looked at the money for 2 men, which seemed a little small. But on the other hand, Jack was right. If they were to kill each other now, they wouldn't be any better off because it was hard to get lost in a crowd with black eyes. And they're almost equally strong. I agreed, he wheezed. Money first, then everything else. There's a sack right here. Jack slid a dark utility bag over to him. Here, put it in. A pack for you, a pack for me. All the money's already here, and he kicked the backpack on the floor. But Clem, contrary to his calculations, was in no hurry to bend over even next to his opponent. Shake it out here, he ordered, pointing to the improvised table, and we'll divide it. Jack complied, and they began to pull one pack from the pile at a time, watching each other carefully. Jack was the first to let his guard down. Only for a second, but it was enough for Clem. He put all his fury into the blow, then struck again and again, keeping his opponent on his feet. Then, as if maddened, he decided to try out a technique he had learned long ago. From the side of his back, I put one hand around his head near his forehead, and the other around his shoulders, and yanked him sharply in different directions. A distinctive crunch sounded. Clem lowered his limp body to the floor, staggered, and stepped back. He only now realized what he had done. He looked at the money, quickly threw it into his backpack, and rushed to the laboratory. He poured the white powder into the bag Jack had given him, weighed almost a kilogram on his hand, enough to last him a long time. Escape. Crossing the rooms, Clem went to the closets with clothes, chose the rags he needed, wrapped the bag with the powder in some of them, threw the rest on top of the backpack to disguise the main load. He found a few more bills, scattered them in his pockets. They would come in handy for traveling expenses. I threw the luggage over my shoulders and jumped out into the street, started the bike, and sped away from the village. He knew the local forest and field trails perfectly well. A car wouldn't always get through, but he'd get through on his trusty iron horse. Good thing he'd filled up the tank the day before. He could drive 300 kilometers or even more, bypassing the highway and cameras, without fear and quickly. No one will even realize which way he went. And then he'll figure something out. With that kind of money, he's not going to get lost. He'll go to warm places where there are a lot of people and visitors, where it's easy to get lost. Clem stopped in the thick of the forest and threw away the disconnected phone. Anthony was right. People sometimes get lost in the middle of nowhere. He wasn't as stupid as everyone thought he was, he grinned, and, putting his foot on the pedal, rode off into the sunset. 2 weeks later, Anthony could smell the aroma of fresh-baked goods as soon as he stepped into the driveway. His sister was waiting for him. Anthony adjusted the strap of his hiking backpack. What would he tell her? That it was his fault that Clem had escaped. That it was her abuser who would go unpunished. Elizabeth wisely did not question everything from the doorstep. But the conversation at the table did not stick. She waited impatiently for news. It's all over, Anthony began. The whole network was covered. Manufacturers, not only Austin, and dealers, including some very large ones. 4/6 of the businessmen can be brought for violence. In Jack's phone, they found records of all the crimes. 2 were in custody, but Clem got away with the money, alas. You said 2, but there were 4 of them, right? Elizabeth clarified. Jack got off. Anthony grinned. They got him off because he's going to spend the rest of his life in a wheelchair. Completely paralyzed, fractured cervical vertebrae. Clem did his best. He put Jack in hospice, but he's a pain in the ass with his boorish behavior. He was a scumbag, and he's still a scumbag. Elizabeth, Billy says all you have to do is write a statement. The girl shook her head. She was tired of the animosity in the village, and if the same thing happened here in Chicago, she would go mad. You'd have to release the video for proof, wouldn't you? She asked quietly. Anthony nodded. Then why? He'd run away anyway. They'd find him eventually, Anthony assured her. There's an APB out on him. Elizabeth shivered as if she were cold. Couldn't he come back for revenge? She asked the most troubling question of all. Absolutely not. He's a coward, afraid for his own skin. No, he'll hide in holes for a long time, praying not to be caught. He'll find a quiet corner and he won't poke his nose out of it. I won't write anything. Why rake up the past? Guess that's my fate. Tell me about yourself. Where are you going now? I'm leaving to study for a higher degree, to the FSB Institute. Of course, there will be some tests to pass, but it's done. Billy advised and helped me, thanks to him. So far away, Elizabeth marveled. What did your parents say? Well, my mother began to cry and wail, and my father, Anthony, mimicked Harry. Why are you crying? He's a man. He can't spend his whole life sitting in a woman's skirt. Elizabeth smiled sadly. Even if she had such an unenviable fate, but at least her brother was lucky. She was truly happy for him. Alexander is sending me to study too, only closer in Detroit, she shared her news. To be a manager in general, but on the condition that I will come back here to work. I've already called my grandmother. I'll be staying with her. Oh, Anthony, she's so excited. I'll be in Detroit by the pass, Anthony smiled. I'll drop in for an hour to visit her. Elizabeth, don't be discouraged. Life is all sorts of things. Who knows how it will turn out in the future? Time will pass, the wounds will heal. There's no one to muddy the waters in the village now. Our parents are alone, they'll miss you, and you'll become their favorite daughter. You'll write to me, okay? Especially if there's another story. I don't want to hear about it from strangers. Where are you leaving? Elizabeth asked. Early tomorrow morning, almost overnight. I'll wrap you some pies with me, Elizabeth tried to look calm, but her voice treacherously trembled. Meeting at the cafe. They were sitting in a summer cafe in the big city, Elizabeth, a second-year student, and Billy. The day before, the girl had received a message from the major. I'll be in Detroit. Any information, can we meet? I understand, Elizabeth, began Billy when I made a small order. This is an old story, and you do not want to remember it at all. But I thought I'd take a chance in case you might be interested. Was he detained? The girl asked, clearly understanding where the major was going. He promised to keep her in the loop, and here he is, keeping his promise. No, answered the guardian of order, smiling enigmatically, but they found him. Elizabeth sighed. Of course, she didn't write a statement, and there is no evidence. There is nothing to prosecute for. The criminal will remain unpunished. I understand, she said, but I'm not going to write anything anyway. No, we could put him away on other charges. He put Jack in a wheelchair for good, and he wants to pay him back. But he's had a very unusual experience himself. Listen. Clem woke up suddenly, and all the sensations of the surrounding world at once collapsed on him. The lighting was so bright that it seeped even through his closed eyelids. It smelled of ozone, like after a thunderstorm, only stronger. Hearing picked up incomprehensible sounds like scraping, rattling, and human voices. Touch. Clem suddenly realized with horror that he was gone. Not only could he not move, but he couldn't even feel his own body, as if it were absent. I'm dead, ran through his head. Clem cautiously opened one eye and looked around. Yes, he was. Small blue stars overhead. In front of him, a white wall blocking visibility. Clem tried to remember what had happened. His stomach ached. No, of course, he had had a nagging pain before for a long time. Probably 6 months, but Clem had not rushed to the hospital. He had his own tried-and-true remedy, a magic powder he'd stolen from Austin. But here it cramped all at once, so much so that he couldn't see the light of day. I had to call an ambulance because I wanted to live. They groped him, examined him, and rushed him into surgery. It was either an ulcer or appendicitis. So that's what it is. Now he just woke up on the operating table. Clem had heard of such cases, but he didn't think it could happen to him. He tried once more to move his arm or leg, to turn his head sideways, but his body wouldn't listen. It's cool to wake up on your own operation, thought Clem. The main thing that the anesthesia did not stop working. The sheet only interferes, but nothing not to look. But at least listen. It is interesting. what the doctors talk about. They say they are discussing girls. Clem turned into hearing, and soon the speech of the surrounding people became clearer. Look, and here too, it was a woman. A nurse, probably. Yes, the whole abdomen is affected, not a single healthy organ. If you look at the lungs, it's likely to be the same, said the man. Obviously a doctor. I don't get it. It's a lot of pain. How did he live with it? A woman's voice again. How? How? Do I have to explain it to you, Julia? He was on some kind of chemo that took away the pain, made the tumor grow, and destroyed his organs. 3 in 1, as they say. Clem was just beginning to understand what was said, but the last phrase stunned him. Maybe he misunderstood something. He'd be sure to question everything later, but what he heard next shocked him. Would you like to see it? The doctor asked. Of course I do, mentally shouted Clem. But they were obviously not addressing him. Who else could be here? Students? Who authorized it? He, Clem, had given no such consent. Here, continued the doctor, it's all metastasis of a cancerous tumor. It's already taken over the entire body, rarely seen only at autopsy. Now it is impossible to determine where the tumor was the primary, and where its branches. Wow! 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 You can't even see the healthy cells here. Can you look over there? There were surprised voices. Clem mentally yelled to stop this outrage. He's here, he's alive, he's only 27, and he has his whole life ahead of him. And they behave with him as with an exhibit in a morgue. He's going to stutter after saying that, and he'll file a complaint against those soulless doctors. I understand, Elizabeth, began Billy, when they made a small order. This is an old story, and you do not want to remember it at all. But I thought I'd take a chance in case you might be interested. Was he detained? The girl asked, clearly understanding where the major was going. He promised to keep her in the loop, and here he is, keeping his promise. No, answered the guardian of order, smiling enigmatically, but they found him. Elizabeth sighed. Of course, she didn't write a statement, and there is no evidence, there is nothing to prosecute for. The criminal will remain unpunished. I understand, she said, but I'm not going to write anything anyway. No, we could put him away on other charges. He put Jack in a wheelchair for good, and he wants to pay him back. But he's had a very unusual experience himself. Listen. Clem woke up suddenly, and all the sensations of the surrounding world at once collapsed on him. The lighting was so bright that it seeped even through his closed eyelids. It smelled of ozone, like after a thunderstorm, only stronger. Hearing picked up incomprehensible sounds like scraping, rattling, and human voices. Touch. Clem suddenly realized with horror that he was gone. Not only could he not move, but he couldn't even feel his own body, as if it were absent. I'm dead, ran through his head. Clem cautiously opened one eye and looked around. Yes, he was. Small blue stars overhead. In front of him a white wall blocking visibility. Clem tried to remember what had happened. His stomach ached. No, of course, he had had a nagging pain before for a long time, probably 6 months, but Clem had not rushed to the hospital. He had his own tried and true remedy, a magic powder he'd stolen from Austin. But here it cramped all at once, so much so that he couldn't see the light of day. I had to call an ambulance because I wanted to live. They groped him, examined him, and rushed him into surgery. It was either an ulcer or appendicitis. So that's what it is. Now he just woke up on the operating table. Clem had heard of such cases, but he didn't think it could happen to him. He tried once more to move his arm or leg, to turn his head sideways, but his body wouldn't listen. What's cool to wake up on your own operation, thought Clem. The main thing that the anesthesia did not stop working. The sheet only interferes, but nothing, not to look. But at least listen. It is interesting what the doctors talk about. They say they are discussing girls. Clem turned into hearing, and soon the speech of the surrounding people became clearer. Look, and here too, it was a woman, a nurse probably. Yes, the whole abdomen is affected, not a single healthy organ. If you look at the lungs, it's likely to be the same, said the man, obviously a doctor. I don't get it. It's a lot of pain. How did he live with it? A woman's voice again. How? How? Do I have to explain it to you, Julia? He was on some kind of chemo that took away the pain, made the tumor grow, and destroyed his organs. 3 in 1, as they say. Clem was just beginning to understand what was said, but the last phrase stunned him. Maybe he misunderstood something. He'd be sure to question everything later. But what he heard next shocked him. Would you like to see it? The doctor asked. Of course I do, mentally shouted Clem. But they were obviously not addressing him. Who else could be here? Students? Who authorized it? Clem had given no such consent. Here, continued the doctor, it's all metastasis of a cancerous tumor. It's already taken over the entire body, rarely seen only at autopsy. Now it is impossible to determine where the tumor was the primary and where its branches. Wow, you can't even see the healthy cells here. Can you look over there? There were surprised voices. Clem mentally yelled to stop this outrage. It's here, he's alive, he's only 27, and he has his whole life ahead of him. And they behave with him as with an exhibit in the morgue. He's going to stutter after saying that, and he'll file a complaint against those soulless doctors. So, to cure him cannot be already. There was a timid girl's voice. Clem froze, but also only mentally. Alas, Anna, I'll tell you all more, the doctor spoke in a calm, casual tone, as if he was lecturing in the classroom, not standing next to the cut man. I think you all realize that his body is already working at the limit of its capabilities, what is called breathing on the lamplight. And any operation is a colossal load. In this case, it turns out that we have loaded the whole fractured organism. I really hope that the heart will still withstand a little more and will not become here on the operating table. As for recovery, he doesn't have the strength and ability to do it anymore. He's not coming out of the ICU. And if he doesn't even wake up, that's the best outcome for him. Oh, look, he seems to be blinking. One of the students exclaimed fearfully. Let's check it out. That confident voice entered the conversation for the first time. Well, young man. Then Clem saw the face, if you can call it eyes, between the cap and mask. After a brief examination, the doctor summarized. It's nothing. You just woke up. It happens. Theoretically, you cannot even immerse a person in sleep. It is done to protect his psyche. Otherwise, they hear anecdotes and take them as truth. Let's fix it. No, tried to resist Clem, feeling his consciousness slowly shutting down. But his thoughts, albeit loud, were of course not heard by anyone. Clem woke up again and saw the white ceiling. 2 IVs connected to both arms. Twisted his head from side to side. It moved only a little. Something was in the way. He tried to lift his arm, but he pulled only his hand off the bed and dropped it back down as if it were filled with lead. He exhaled noisily. The fleeting movement took all his strength. A conversation overheard at the surgery came to mind. His heart clenched and jumped, sending an icy wave through his body. Clem made several more attempts to move. All of them were given with great difficulty. Incredible fatigue, as if chained his body to the bed. Could it be that everything that had been said then, he had not dreamed? The horror of the situation came on slowly but inevitably. For the first couple of days they talked to him, questioned him. Talking quickly became tiresome, and the questions Clem asked remained unanswered. And then they lost interest in him. It was as if he had become a soulless doll that had to be cared for. A simulator for numerous students. Clem was thrashing around in rage. Mentally, attempts to turn around on his own were painful, and sitting down was dizzying. And after these attempts, students and female students invariably came running and put the fallen-out tubes back in. But the worst torment were the dreams. In them Clem invariably returned to his native village. walking in the fields, hanging out in clubs, riding a bike. Sometimes he could smell the oil and gasoline, the taste of freedom, and he'd wake up. Days went by. He didn't feel any better. It didn't get worse either. Anger was replaced by despair and fear. Clem began to howl loudly in his voice. A nurse would come and add something from a syringe to the drip, and he'd fall back into the dreams he'd dreamed of escaping. All Clem could do now was think. The brain worked actively, then plunging into visions, then realizing reality. Cruel and already unchanging. That's the story, Billy said. How does it feel? Do you want to look into his eyes now? Is that possible? They won't let you in the hospital. But I talked to the doctor, and he said he'd let me take some pictures. On your word of honor, and only on an exception basis. Is that okay with you? Elizabeth took the phone and looked at the pictures of the flabby, tattooed body, taken from the waist down and stuffed with tubes. The next pictures showed a close-up of the face. There was horror and despair in a stare that looked nowhere. A face contorted with anger stared into the lens. Her abuser realized the situation he was in and had no illusions. Did he repent? It didn't matter. Elizabeth had never thought that someone else's grief could arouse positive emotions in her. She thought that only immoral people were capable of such a thing. But now the girl felt, if not joy, then relief. It was as if from her shoulders fell the rest of the heavy load that she had been carrying for more than 2 years, which had built a wall between her and almost all representatives of the male sex. It was as if the door to freedom had swung open all the way, and now she could start her life anew, smiling in the spring. She was no longer afraid. How long has he been like this? In the hospital, Elizabeth asked. About 10 days now. His heart is young, strong, even on minimal nutrition. Couldn't you take him off all that? Elizabeth asked. Well, to stop the agony, because this is not life. Doctors are loyal to the Hippocratic Oath, and according to the law, it's a criminal offense, unless the family consents, and I'm not sure, but they don't care about him. They're probably sick of him. We just have to wait for the body to give up on him. Do you think we should tell Jack about it? The girl hesitated. Her mind said that she couldn't be so cruel, that the boy had gotten enough. But her feelings, alternating from pity to contempt, said otherwise. I think no, she said at last. Let him continue to think that his abuser lives at his pleasure.
Thank you for watching this video to the end. Subscribe to the channel. Like it, write comments if you like the story, and see you on the channel.